We are ruled by our impulses. We are ruled by the algorithm, and we are ruled by companies, and we are ruled by what we think that other people think. We are ruled, in fact, by everything except a deliberate, conscious self that we keep telling is the one in charge. Trump has signed an executive order to shut down the Department of Education. Meanwhile, professors in college have reportedly said that the majority of their students submitted ChatGPT written paper and they didn't even delete the AI signature on the bottom of it, meaning they didn't even read what they have submitted. Meanwhile, on TikTok and Instagram, there's a new movement called Unschooling, which is an extreme version of homeschooling, with the difference that the children aren't even schooled. The principle is that children should not be forced to learn. If they don't want to learn math or physics, they don't have to. There's no curriculum, no teachers, no force, no nothing that the child doesn't want to do on its own. Now, 40% of American fourth graders cannot read or write on a basic level. And 60% of high schoolers cannot read an entire paragraph and tell you what's in it. And nearly half of American adults have not read a single book in the past year. Now, I want to start right here, because I'm about to make an argument about freedom that sounds strange at first, but bear the statistics in mind so you will understand what I'm up to. Now, the unschooling movement has been going on for years, and it's been accelerating, especially since the pandemic, because of course, back then children didn't have to go to school and parents were experimenting with alternative ways of learning. The results are no curriculum, no testing, no mandatory subjects. The child decides. And the argument, beautifully made by its advocates, is that this is the truest form of child freedom. They say that the conventional schooling system is a kind of prison and that the state is forming minds in an early stage where it just had no right to. And the parents who choose to unschool their children often do this with great intentions. They want to raise a free spirit, a free mind, a free human being. Now, I want to say something quite difficult about this. Not because I think those parents are bad. In fact, I very much agree with the importance of raising free children. But because I think the definition of freedom they're giving to that child is not the entire story of freedom. And the consequences of this wrong definition of freedom is showing up in the literacy data. And it's creating less free human beings and a weaker society that needs a stronger state in return, because people didn't learn the capabilities that they would need in order to shape their life at their own terms. If you can't read or write, how are you going to access the world's knowledge and that you would need in order to build the things that you want to build? I wish to be a subject, not an object, moved by reasons, by conscious purposes which are my own. That's from Berlin in 1958. In his lecture at Oxford, the philosopher Berlin made a distinction that shaped almost everything that has ever said about freedom since. He said that there are two concepts of liberty, and most political confusion comes from mistaking one for the other. The first concept of freedom was called negative liberty, freedom from. It's the open road, it's the absence of obstacles. It's like no force is stopping you. No one is interfering with what you choose to do. This is the freedom most people mean when they refer to freedom. It's also the freedom that the homeschooling or unschooling parents are referring to when they say their child should not be forced to learn what it doesn't want to. There is no force preventing the child to play and develop freely without interference. After all, it is the freedom to do whatever you want. The second concept of liberty is called positive liberty. And that is the capacity to actually do something with that open road, to do something with that freedom you have. Positive liberty is built by the skills, the resources, the capacity for you to go after what you truly want. It is the inner direction, it is the developed self that turns the empty road into a destination. When it comes to unschooling, one could say those children are free from the force to learn. But I would argue they lose the freedom to exercise meaningful choices. And this is what the unschooling debate is missing. And what I think the literacy crisis is showing us in real time with real children. When we tell a child, You don't have to read if you don't want to. We are giving them negative liberty. We are removing the obligation. We are removing the imposition. We are removing the structure. And by every measure of freedom as non-interference, we have made them more free. But we have also made them less able to read, to write, to access information, and to form their own opinions in life. So the child who cannot read at 14 has formally unrestricted negative freedom. No law forbids them anything. The internet is open to them. The library is open to them. The full inheritance of human knowledge, written down over thousands of years, free, available, is sitting there on shelves, untouched. They cannot reach any of it. They are free from the imposition of literacy. They are not free to enter the conversation that all the people who shape the world they live in have been having in written form over generations. A study by the US Department of Justice found that the strongest single predictor of imprisonment in the American adult population is not poverty, not race, not family structure, it is third-grade reading proficiency. Children who cannot read by the age of 9 are vastly more likely to end up in prison than children who can. And this is not a coincidence. It is what happens when negative freedom is unrestricted and arrives without the positive freedom to actually build the skills and to get the means to go after what you truly want in life. Negative freedom without positive freedom means the road is open, but you simply don't have a map. So I want to be careful here. Parents who unschool their children are not the enemies of freedom. They are usually the people who care the most about it. They want to raise free human beings, and I appreciate that a lot. And what they're noticing is that the state is shaping a curriculum based on certain interests that is creating obedient citizens, obedient workers, and people dependent on a certain system. The schooling system rarely produces free people, but it doesn't mean that removing yourself entirely from learning is a solution here. John Stuart Mill saw this already in 1859. He worried more about conformity than he worried about tyranny. He wrote, and I'm quoting now, Mill was right to worry. He was probably more right than he knew. But Mill, who is one of the parents of the modern liberal tradition, also understood something the homeschooling movement sometimes misses. He believed that the function of liberty was to allow human beings to develop into their full capacity. Liberty was not the goal. Liberty was a condition under which the goal, a developed, thinking, free person, would become possible. The freedom not to read does not produce a free person. In fact, it may create a more dependent person, because the less capable a person is to achieve certain things on their own, the more they need a strong state to step in to ensure the survival and the security of that person. So if you want to raise a free human being, make sure they are capable to survive and thrive on their own and to collaborate with others in community, because only that is how the state doesn't have to step in order to guarantee a certain amount of safety, security, and living standard for the majority of people, which is even what the chancellor in Germany recently said. He said that the German people are still in charge and responsible for the fate of their own lives. And over the past decades, people have become more dependent on the state, and we trust the state to take care of the citizen when we are actually still in charge of our own lives. So the dependency created by a lack of capability, a lack of skill, a lack of literacy is actually creating weak society that needs a strong state. But neither the state nor the people want that situation. We still want to have a free society, which means we also need the freedom to, the positive liberty to be self-sufficient, to collaborate and to bring something to the table from ourselves. So here's the point I want to make in this video, and it's frankly the whole point of this entire channel. Freedom is not a state, freedom is a skill. And what I mean by this is that freedom is not what happens when nobody is stopping you. Freedom is what you are capable of achieving on your own. It is a developed capacity, and like every skill, it has sub-skills. It has a practice, and it can be trained, or it can be neglected. These are some of the key sub-skills when it comes to freedom. First, the capacity to access and analyze information. Second, the capacity to identify the state of your nervous system, to control your breath, and to pause before taking action. Third, the capacity to distinguish between fear and love. The capacity to handle your own mind, to handle and direct your own focus. Fifth, the capacity to delay gratification for something better later. You may know the marshmallow experiment for that, for example. Sixth, the capacity to take responsibility for your own actions and their consequences. Seventh, the capacity to disagree respectfully and to accept the free choice of other people. 8. The capacity to keep an agreement with yourself and others. Integrity. 9th, the capacity to tolerate discomfort. And 10th, the capacity to create meaning, to choose your lens on reality, and to pursue your truest, purest, deepest desire. With each one, you will find it easier to obtain the next one, as your capacity to regulate your nervous system will help you to distinguish how love and fear feels in your body, so you will find it easier to choose your thoughts more wisely, and your capacity to tolerate discomfort will eventually help you fulfill your purest desires. The person who has all of these is free in a way that no political system can ever take away from them. And the person who has none of these is unfree even in a country that does not have a single law. And by the way, there is a definition of freedom out there that I think is the most dangerous lie of the entire century. It is a slogan that says, freedom is doing whatever you want, whenever you want, with whomever you want. It is a slogan of every addiction, every compulsion, every appetite that ends up running its host like a marionette. The drug abuser is doing whatever they want. So is the gambler. So is the woman who cannot stop scrolling on Instagram at 3 a.m. at night. So is the man who is eating himself to an early death. And so is the lover who cannot stay long enough in a relationship to experience intimacy. Each of them is free in the negative liberty sense. No one is stopping them, and each of them is a slave to their impulses, a slave to their lower parts of self that is often in conflict with the higher self that wants entirely different things for their lives. The philosopher Berlin had a phrase for this. He said, the question of freedom is not what is stopping me, but who is in charge here? And the answer to that second question for many of us is a person that we would not choose to be ruled by. We are ruled by our impulses. We are ruled by the algorithm, and we are ruled by companies, and we are ruled by what we think that other people think. We are ruled, in fact, by everything except the deliberate, conscious self that we keep telling ourselves was the one in charge. Now, as you're watching this, you may ask, but what about free will? Does free will exist at all? Well, whether you think you have a free will or you don't have a free will, you're about to be right. If you're convinced in advance that your decisions are predetermined and that your impulses are uncontrollable, you will tend to behave as though they are. The belief is part of the system here. Your belief is part of the mechanism. People who think they cannot resist their own cravings rarely resist them. So if you think people don't have a free will anyway, well, you won't have a free will for sure. But people who believe they have a free will and they are practicing it, and they are practicing to really go after what they choose, and they are resisting their first impulses, well, they have a good chance of actually having something like free will. Now that leads to my second claim, which is free will is not a default state, but also, just as freedom, it is a skill to train. So again, free will is not something we are born with, it is something that we can develop. A 2 years old doesn't have free will in any meaningful sense. They have impulses, and their impulses run them. As they grow, they acquire slowly and only with effort the capacity to pause between the impulse and the action. A great experiment here is the marshmallow experiment. It's a famous experiment where children were offered a marshmallow and they were promised a second marshmallow if they would be willing to wait for it. The mature adult sometimes does, not always though, because again, we can choose whether we want to develop free will or not. So free will is not a given, it has to be developed. So I don't say that freedom means that you always delay gratification, but the deciding question here is, are you able to? So when someone asks whether or not they have free will, my honest answer is, well, probably not yet. Not unless they have done the work to develop it. And those practices of freedom are tiny acts. They do not look like freedom at first, but they are the skills that freedom is made of. Now, last but not least, I want to come back to John Stuart Mill, because I started with the unschooling parents and I want to give them the best argument back. Mill's On Liberty, published in 1859, is a founding text of modern liberal thought. At the heart of Mill's core text on liberty is the idea that liberty is a buffer between the individual and the authority of the state. That without that buffer, the state, even a democratic state, even a well-meaning state, will eventually press itself onto the inner lives of its citizens. Will tell them what to think, what to read, what to value, mold them all to look exactly like one another. The parents who unschool, they are noticing that state education forms minds in a particular shape, and they are right. But Mill was not arguing that the way to protect a child is to give the child freedom to refuse all formation. He was arguing the opposite. He thought that liberty existed in order to make possible the development of free-thinking, capable adults. So freedom is fragile, and a free society requires individuals who have the capacity to be free. Not just freedom from force, but the freedom to develop the capabilities they will need in order to live their life. And when literacy fails, when the attention collapses and we cannot watch a long video like this, when we cannot sit with our discomfort, when no one keeps their word, the state almost has to expand to fill that gap in order to make society work. And liberty for the unformed citizen does not produce a free society. It produces a weak society that needs more states, not less, to keep itself functioning. And that is a paradox at the heart of every modern democracy. The freer we want to be in our societies, the more developed we need to become. And we are right now watching what happens when the development collapses faster than the freedom does. And if you want to find out how free you are yourself, how much you're advanced in all those sub-skills we discussed in this video, you will find a free questionnaire in the video description. And thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on this and what came out for you in the questionnaire. And subscribe to the Liberty channel. This means a lot.